On August 12, 2000, the worst disaster in the history of the Russian submarine fleet occurred. The nuclear submarine Kursk sank in the Barents Sea at a depth of 108 meters after an explosion on board. For many weeks, all of Russia followed the fate of the sailors who found themselves in a trap from which they were no longer destined to escape. What went wrong, why it was not possible to save the crew, and who is to blame for the catastrophe of the Russian nuclear submarine? On August 11, at noon, Kursk fired a Granit training rocket. The launches were successful. The boat began to go deeper and headed towards the area where torpedo firing was planned. The commander of the submarine, Captain First Rank Gennady Lyakin, is in stable contact with the command post of the Northern Fleet, as expected, reporting on all the actions of the submarine. On board are crew members and division headquarters officers, as well as military representatives and an engineer from one of the specialized factories. They happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. A total of 180 people. Kursk is fully loaded. 24 Granit missiles, 2 of which are training, 20 combat, and 1 training torpedo, 533 mm caliber and several 650 caliber torpedoes. At 6 in the morning the next day the boat arrived at the required area of the sea. Russian warships with their flagship, the heavy nuclear-powered missile cruiser Peter the Great, were also arriving there. They were supposed to play the role of the enemy, and the strikes delivered from the Kursk were conditional according to plan. 2.5 hours later, the Kursk submarine carries out a mock strike on the ships. The management records that everything is going according to plans. And after another 16 minutes, Lyakin reports on the work done to the command post, reporting readiness for torpedo firing. This was his last report. The sonar systems of Peter the Great's ship monitor the sonar of the submarine, which was preparing for a torpedo attack. 11:30. Hydroacoustics detects unusual sound. Its nature is unclear, but it is similar to an underwater explosion. Shortly after the sound, the ship Peter the Great receives a hydrodynamic blow to the hull. The command does not attach any importance to this. Either they didn't pay attention, or they decided not to scare their superiors ahead of time. Unfortunately, this happens in the Army. A hydrodynamic shock was also recorded on the strategic submarine cruiser K-18 Karelia, which was fulfilling its task and preparing to launch a ballistic missile. The commander of the submarine behaved more responsibly, reporting the incident to the command post of the Northern Fleet, after which he continued to complete the task. It later turned out that at the time of the explosion, K-18 was already 80 kilometers from Kursk. The explosion was so strong that the Norwegian seismic station, which is located at a distance of 470 kilometers, recorded 2 tremors. The power of the second explosion, according to experts, was 5 tons intradil equivalent. The ships acting as mock targets for Kursk leave the areas in which the boat was located, expecting it to surface to report the results of the shooting. Kursk does not float up, helicopters soar into the sky. The flagship is trying to contact Kursk via underwater communication. Explosive packages are flying into the water as a signal to the submarine about the need for an emergency ascent. Silence, 17.00. According to the rules of the Navy, Kursk should be considered an emergency due to a long absence of communication. However, the submarine does not receive emergency status. Most likely, the command is afraid to report the emergency to the top, hoping that the situation will be resolved. An IL-38 takes off to search for the boat. Rescue tugs and Peter the Great also go there. 23.00. The Northern Fleet Command officially recognizes the emergency. An accident occurred in Kursk, and the relevant information is finally being transmitted to Moscow. If you believe the sources of the Minister of Defense, then it was Igor Sergeyev. I found out what happened at 00:30. It is obvious that Sergeyev was at the very top of the military hierarchy, not counting the president, of course, but the fact that the information took so long was simply terrible. The President herself learned of the incident at 7 a.m. the next day, and an operation to rescue the sailors began, which was followed by everyone. But the operation was unsuccessful, the days flew by, time slipped through our fingers, and hopes for saving the sailors melted away. At 3:20 in the morning, even before Vladimir Putin was informed, Peter the Great found the boat at the bottom with an echo sounder. The first rescue ship arrived at the scene of the accident at 10 a.m. According to the investigation, at 11:28 am, a 650 mm torpedo exploded in the first compartment of the nuclear submarine cruiser Ka-41 Kursk, which was being prepared for firing practice. Events developed at lightning speed. Through the hole, water poured into the compartment under crazy pressure, and the 154-meter cruiser, which was at a depth of 18 meters, sank sharply to the bottom, crashing into the ground and plowing through it with its nose. The depth was already 108 meters. Already at the bottom, a second explosion occurred, which destroyed the entire bow of Kursk. According to investigators, 35 seconds passed between the explosions, and the second explosion was 25 times more powerful. Those who were in the second and third compartments died horribly. Two huge bulkheads between the compartments were torn from their places and hit the crew members with pressure. Moreover, despite the fact that the bulkhead door to the second compartment where the submarine's command post is located was battened down, the bulkhead flaps of the ventilation system were open. Through these slams a powerful pneumatic shock passed through, which, if not killed, then incapacitated everyone who was at the main command post. The circumstances were such that there was no one to carry out emergency blowing of the main ballast tanks in order to raise the boat to the surface. Those who survived gathered in the ninth compartment. An emergency rescue airlock was equipped there for evacuation. The submariners took with them diving suits, diving underwear, breathing apparatus, as well as cans with plates for air regeneration. Forensic experts who performed an autopsy on the body from the ninth compartment came to the conclusion that the sailors who were there lived no more than 4.5 hours, a maximum of 8. Not everyone believes this expert verdict. Some point out that it was beneficial for the authorities to inform people that the death of the sailors was immediate and it was impossible to save them. Many believed that the submariners had a chance to be saved if the rescue operation began immediately or if foreigners were allowed to participate in it earlier. But the object was top secret, a nuclear submarine, and for a long time they did not want to allow foreigners there. No one knows how it really happened. Over the course of several days, Russian rescuers tried several times to dock a special device to the Kursk emergency hatch in order to get inside. It was subsequently announced that the special metal docking ring on the submarine was damaged and all attempts were unsuccessful. The Russian Federation was then negotiating with Great Britain and Norway, which offered assistance in rescuing the crew, but Norwegian divers were able to begin work only on August 20, 8 days after the accident. The very next day, the Norwegians were able to open the submarine's aft emergency escape hatch. There were no survivors inside Kursk. Many people remember how, back in 2000, Vladimir Putin answered CNN host Larry King's question about what happened to the submarine. Who is to blame for the tragedy? A criminal case regarding the death of the Kursk was opened by the main military prosecutor's office, under the article of violation of traffic safety rules for the operation of maritime transport. The investigation lasted 2 years. Prosecutor General Ustinov said in February 2002 that serious violations had been identified on the part of the Northern Fleet Command of the submarine's crew. Subsequently, the case was closed for lack of evidence of a crime. Persons responsible for the disaster of the APRK Kursk are associated with the death of 180 people. You are on board the cruiser? No. This is written in the resolution of the senior investigator for especially important cases of the main military prosecutor's office. The main reason for the investigation was considered to be a manufacturing defect in the 65 to 76 PV Kid torpedo, which was manufactured at a plant in Almaty. The torpedo's service life was already coming to an end and would soon be written off. Due to micro cracks in the tank gasket, the oxidizer entered the torpedo tube, where a chemical reaction began, releasing oxygen and heat. The torpedo caught fire and exploded in the torpedo tube. This is what the former commander of the Northern Fleet, Admiral Vyacheslav Popov, says. NATO submarine. She was there in the area where she encountered Kursk. Back in 2000, in Arkady Mamontov's documentary about Kursk, Popov said the following. The main version is a collision with an unidentified submarine, which hit the most vulnerable spot of our submarine of this project. Of course, it is not realized. Popov claims that he can almost accurately report the name of a foreign submarine. The media picked up this information. Presidential Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov declined to comment on Popov's statement. Experts say that there are no compelling reasons to consider Popov's version reliable. Most likely, it is of a conspiracy nature, and the media are ready to replicate anything. Be that as it may, the official version remains unchanged. After the tragedy, a memorial was erected in Moscow on which it is written, "Memory of the crew of the nuclear submarine cruiser Kursk who died while performing a combat training mission."